Silver moonlight spilled across the ancient stone spires of Selna, casting long shadows that danced upon crystalline pathways. The perpetual luminescence of the satellite hung impossibly large in the night sky, its pale glow illuminating the floating metropolis below. Kale Throm stood at the edge of the lunar observatory, his mismatched eyes one emerald green, one silver-flecked obsidian reflecting the celestial body that had given this planet its name. Another sleepless night, Scholar Thram? The voice of Tuti, Kalia, floated from behind him, melodic and ethereal as was common among the full-blooded Solari. Kale turned, the scaled pattern along his temples catching the moonlight. The dreams have become more frequent. Kalia, more insistent. The priestess approached, her translucent robes shimmering with embedded crystalline fragments that hummed in subtle harmony with the stone beneath their feet. Unlike Kale's hybrid appearance, Kalia was pure solaritol, willowy, with skin that seemed to absorb and reflect moonlight in equal measure. The ancient ones speak through dreams, especially to those with mixed essence, she said, placing a six-fingered hand upon the stone balustrade. Perhaps they wish to tell you something. Kale's gaze returned to the moon. I've studied human artifacts for decades, their literature, their technology, their desperate final messages. But these dreams show me something else, a chamber, buried deep beneath the silent plains, a woman, suspended in time. A vision, or merely the imagination of a scholar too long immersed in his studies? Kalia's tone was gentle, but Kale detected the undercurrent of concern. That's what I intend to discover, he replied, producing a small crystalline cube from within his robes. It glowed faintly blue, projecting coordinates above his palm. These readings appeared 3 lunar cycles ago. Energy signatures unlike anything in our records, emanating from a sector long thought barren. Kalia's luminescent eyes widened. You cannot mean to investigate alone. The Council would deliberate for years while whatever lies beneath the surface deteriorates further. Kale interrupted, closing his fingers around the cube. I leave at dawn. I wanted you to know, in case you find something that challenges everything we believe. Kalia finished for him. The Technarch faction already views your research as dangerous. Kale, if you truly discover human remains, not remains, Kale whispered, his voice barely audible above the crystalline hum of the observatory. Something alive. The priestess stepped back, her bioluminescent markings flashing in alarm. That's impossible. The great extinction occurred over a millennium ago. Nothing human could have survived. Kale's expression remained resolute. Yet something did. The readings suggest a stasis field, Kalia, primitive by our standards but remarkably resilient. And if you're right, what then? You know the histories, the warnings about awakening what should remain dormant. Kale turned from the moon to face her fully. I know that we have built our entire civilization upon the ruins of humanity, using their knowledge, claiming their abandoned worlds. I know that the Solari believe human consciousness ascended to the stars, while the Technarchs claim they destroyed themselves through technological hubris. But what if neither is true? What if someone deliberately preserved a piece of humanity waiting for the right moment? Kalia's expression softened. The human part of you seeks connection with its roots. It's natural, but this isn't about my heritage, Kale insisted, though the slight flush that crept up his neck betrayed him. It's about truth. History forgotten becomes myth, and myth misremembered becomes superstition. I refuse to let that happen. The priestess studied him for a long moment, then sighed. I cannot stop you, but I can offer protection. Take this. She removed a pendant from around her neck, a sliver of moonstone set in twisting silver filaments. It will shield your thoughts from those who would seek to intrude, and it may guide you when pathways grow dark. Kale accepted the gift with surprise. The amulet of lunar whispers? Kalia, this is a sacred relic. I can't. You can and you will, she said firmly. Because I fear you may need its protection more than you know. The dreams that plague you. They may not be memories of the past, but warnings about the future. As the amulet settled against his chest, Kale felt a cool calm wash over him, momentarily quieting the persistent visions that had haunted his sleep for months. Thank you, he said simply. Kalia nodded, then turned to leave. At the archway, she paused. Kale, the Technarchs maintain surveillance drones throughout the silent plains. Be careful. With that final warning, she disappeared into the twisting corridors of the observatory, leaving Kale alone with the moon, the amulet, and the weight of his impending journey. Dawn on Selna was not the brilliant explosion of light experienced on other worlds, but rather a gradual brightening as the moon's reflected glow intensified with the rising of the distant sun. Kyle's research vessel, a modest craft designed for archaeological expeditions, hummed to life as he completed the pre-launch sequence. Destination coordinates locked, announced the ship's integrated consciousness. Caution. Destination lies within restricted zone beta. Technarch authorization required for entry. Kale inserted a small data crystal into the console. Override Protocol Alpha 7, Archaeological Preservation Act, Section 12. The ship hesitated. Systems processing the authorization codes that Kale had spent months carefully acquiring through his academic connections. Override accepted. Journey time to coordinates 3 hours, 17 minutes, initiating launch sequence. As the vessel rose from its docking platform, Kale caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows of the launch bay. A figure, slender and furtive, watching his departure. Before he could identify them, the ship accelerated upward, breaking through the crystalline dome of the city and into the open air above. The landscape below transformed gradually as he flew eastward. The gleaming spires and floating gardens of the Solari metropolis gave way to the hybrid structures of the mixed districts, a chaotic but vibrant blend of organic architecture and technological precision. Beyond them lay the stark geometric patterns of Technarch territory, all sharp angles and metallic surfaces that reflected the moonlight in blinding flashes. And finally, the silent plains, a vast expanse of ashen gray, dotted with the occasional rusted remnant of human civilization. It was a forbidden zone, not because of any lingering danger, but because of what it represented, the final battleground of humanity's extinction. Or so the official histories claimed. Kale reviewed his notes as the ship cruised at low altitude, avoiding the standard flight paths that would alert Technarch monitoring systems. The energy signature he had detected emanated from a location that appeared unremarkable on surface scans, a slight depression in the otherwise flat terrain. Perhaps once a building foundation, now covered with centuries of dust and debris. A beginning descent, the ship announced. Anomalous energy readings confirmed. Pattern matches theoretical models of human stasis technology. Kale's heart raced. Theoretical had just become actual. After years of piecing together fragments of human science from degraded archives and scattered artifacts, he was about to face the culmination of his research. The vessel settled gently onto the barren surface, dust swirling around its landing struts. Kale donned his protective gear, not the heavy environmental suits required on truly hostile worlds, but rather a lightweight ensemble designed to filter the fine particulate matter that perpetually hung in the air of the silent plains. Activate perimeter security, he instructed the ship. Alert me to any approaching craft or drones. Stepping out onto the plains, Kyle felt the familiar crunch of compacted ash beneath his boots. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of his scanning equipment. He moved methodically across the depression, the scanner in his hand pulsing more rapidly as he approached what appeared to be a seamless section of ground. "There you are," he murmured, kneeling to brush away layers of compacted dust. Beneath the grime, his fingers found an edge-smooth manufactured distinctly non-natural. Further clearing revealed a panel of some dark material, neither metal nor stone, with faint inscriptions barely visible after centuries of burial. Kale traced the inscriptions with his fingertips, his hybrid genetics allowing him to process the information in ways pure Solari or Technarchs could not. The symbols were human language English, specifically arranged in a pattern that suggested both warning and invitation. "The last sleeper," he translated aloud, "guardian of the seed." His scanner beeped insistently, indicating a hollow space beneath the panel, extending deep into the ground. Something vast lay buried here, not just a stasis pod, but an entire complex. Kale set up perimeter markers, establishing a formal archaeological site as required by interspecies law. It would offer some protection against Technarch interference, at least temporarily. Then he returned to the panel, searching for an access mechanism. It took hours of careful examination before he found a recessed biometric scanner, designed to read human DNA, a technology considered primitive by current standards, but remarkably sophisticated for its time. Kale hesitated, then pressed his palm against the scanner. His hybrid genetics contained enough human markers to trigger recognition. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a long-held breath finally released, the panel slid aside, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Cool air rushed up from below, carrying the sterile scent of preservation chemicals and the unmistakable electric tang of active technology. Kale activated his illumination band, casting a soft blue glow down the staircase, and began his descent. The stairway led to a reinforced door that had partially failed, its locking mechanism corrupted by time. Kyle wedged himself through the opening, emerging into a vast chamber that took his breath away. The room was circular, its walls lined with defunct equipment and darkened display screens. But at its center, bathed in the faint blue glow of emergency lighting that had somehow maintained power for centuries, stood a cylindrical chamber of transparent material, and within it, suspended in crystalline fluid, floated a human woman. Kale approached slowly, reverently. The stasis chamber hummed with quiet energy, its preservation system still functioning after all this time. The woman appeared to be in her early 30s by human standards, her features serene in suspended animation. Dark hair floated around her face like a halo, and her skin was pale not with the luminescence of the Solari, but with the simple absence of sunlight. "Impossible," Kyle whispered, circling the chamber. "The power requirements alone." His eye caught a plaque mounted on the base of the chamber. More English text, this time formal and precise. Subject, Mira Eliades. Designation, Seed Carrier. Activation Protocol, Lunar Synchronicity. Warning, awakening to be performed only in presence of qualified personnel. Kale's scanner analyzed the stasis technology, confirming what he already suspected. This was no ordinary cryogenic suspension. The woman's cellular structure had been preserved through means far more sophisticated than anything documented in surviving human archives. "Who were you?" he asked the silent figure, "and what is this seed you carry?" As if in response to his voice, the chamber's lights pulsed once, and a holographic interface flickered to life at its base. Text scrolled across the projection. Biological integrity 99.3%, neural activity dormant. Awakening cycle incomplete, requires authorization. Kale's heart pounded. The system was interactive, waiting for commands. After centuries of silence, it was ready to complete its purpose. His hand hovered over the interface, trembling slightly. The responsible course of action would be to document everything, return to the Lunar Council, present his findings, and await their decision. That was the protocol for discoveries of this magnitude, but he knew what would happen. The Technarchs would demand immediate termination of the stasis field, citing potential biological hazards. The Solari would insist on maintaining the suspension indefinitely, unwilling to interfere with what they would perceive as a soul's journey. Years would pass in debate while the chamber's systems continued their slow, inevitable decay. And the truth, whatever it was this woman had been preserved to protect, would be lost forever. Kale made his decision. He would not activate the awakening cycle, not yet. But he would prepare for it, study the systems, understand the protocols, and he would protect this discovery until he could ensure its proper handling. He set up monitoring equipment around the chamber, establishing a data link with his ship. Then, reluctantly, he turned to leave. He needed allies, resources, and most importantly, a plan for what would happen when not if the woman awoke. At the entrance to the stairway, Kale paused for one last look at the suspended figure. In the blue glow of the stasis field, he could almost imagine she was underwater, floating peacefully in some primordial sea, waiting to be born into a new world. "I'll return," he promised quietly. "And when I do, I'll help you complete your mission, whatever it may be." As he ascended the stairs, Kale failed to notice the slight change in the chamber's rhythm, a barely perceptible acceleration in the pulse of lights. As if the sleeping system had heard his promise and stirred in anticipation. Above ground, unaware of the subtle change below, Kyle secured the entrance panel and began the journey back to his ship. The moon hung low on the horizon now, casting long shadows across the silent plains. Within those shadows, almost imperceptible against the darkening landscape, the silhouette of a surveillance drone tracked his movements, its optical sensors recording every step. The return journey to the lunar city was tense, Kale's mind racing with implications and possibilities. He had discovered not just an artifact, but a living bridge to humanity's pasta woman who had survived the great extinction through technological means beyond anything documented in historical records. Who had placed her there? Why had she been preserved? And most pressingly, what would happen when she awoke in a world where her species was believed extinct? As his ship approached the crystalline dome of the city, an alert sounded on his console. "Incoming transmission from Technarch Control. Priority code Alpha." Kale's stomach tightened. "Accept transmission." The holographic display flickered, resolving into the stern visage of Technarch Vorok's, a high-ranking official whose cybernetic enhancements gleamed silver against his blue-tinged skin. Though primarily humanoid in appearance, the Technarchs had long ago embraced extensive biological modification, viewing their original form as merely a starting point for improvement. Scholar Throm, Vorok's voice was perfectly modulated, devoid of any natural variation. "You have entered and exited a restricted zone without proper authorization." "I had archaeological dispensation," Kale replied evenly. "My credentials were verified by your own systems. A dispensation for survey work only." Vorok's countered. "Our drones observed you establishing formal excavation markers and accessing a subterranean structure. Such activities require direct Technarch approval, which you did not seek." Kale maintained a neutral expression, though inwardly he cursed his carelessness. "I discovered unexpected ruins that required preliminary assessment. All findings will be properly documented and submitted to both councils, as protocol demands." Indeed. Vurox's artificial eyes narrowed slightly. You will report to Central Processing upon landing for a full debriefing. Any artifacts recovered must be surrendered for quarantine procedures. There were no portable artifacts, Kyle said truthfully. A stasis chamber containing a living human hardly qualified as portable. Then the debriefing should be brief. Vurox's tone suggested he suspected otherwise. Technarch Aaron will meet your vessel. Do not deviate from your assigned landing vector. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Kale with a sense of foreboding. Technarch Aaron was known for his thorough investigations and, unlike Vurox, possessed a reputation for intellectual curiosity that sometimes overrode strict adherence to protocol. This could either work in Kale's favor or prove disastrous. The ship docked at a Technarch platform rather than Kale's usual berth near the observatory, a clear sign that his movements would be closely monitored from this point forward. As promised, Technarch Aaron waited on the platform, his form more conservatively modified than Vurox's, where the senior Technarch embraced obvious mechanical augmentation. Aaron's enhancements were subtle, marked only by the faint circuitry pattern visible beneath his skin and the unnaturally perfect posture of his stance. Scholar Thram, Aaron greeted him as he disembarked. I trust your expedition was enlightening? Kale nodded cautiously. Every journey into the Silent Plains reveals new aspects of our past. A diplomatic answer. Aaron gestured toward a transport pod hovering nearby. Shall we conduct your debriefing somewhere more comfortable than this platform? The invitation was phrased as a courtesy, but Kale recognized it as the command it was. He followed Aaron into the transport, which sealed itself and moved swiftly through the geometric patterns of Technarch architecture. Your interest in human artifacts is well documented, Aaron observed as they traveled. Some within our faction find it concerning. Knowledge should not be feared, Kale replied. Perhaps, but some knowledge comes with responsibilities that not all are prepared to bear. Aaron studied him with unnerving intensity. The human component of your genetics gives you insights others lack, but it may also color your judgment with emotional attachments to a species long extinct. Kale met his gaze steadily. My research is driven by intellectual curiosity, not emotional attachment. The historical record of humanity's final days is fragmentary at best. Filling those gaps benefits all our peoples. A noble sentiment. The transport slowed, docking with a sleek tower that pierced the upper level of the city. But tell me, scholar, what would you do if you discovered something human that was not quite dead? The question struck too close to Kale's secret, and he struggled to maintain his composure. That would depend on what it was and what threat it might pose. A theoretical exercise only, Aaron said smoothly as the transport doors opened. Please, after you. The debriefing room was clinically sterile, its walls embedded with scanning technology designed to detect falsehoods through biological markers. Kale had expected this and had prepared accordingly. Focusing his thoughts on the archaeological aspects of his discovery rather than its true significance. For 2 hours, he answered questions about the site, the structure he had found, and his preliminary analysis. He spoke truthfully about the advanced technology he had encountered, but described it as an automated research facility rather than a stasis chamber. When asked directly if he had found any biological materials, he answered carefully. The facility contained preservation equipment that once housed organic samples, but they had degraded beyond recognition. The statement was constructed to register as truthful. The stasis chamber did indeed preserve organic material, and from the perspective of most modern scanning technology, a suspended human in stasis might well appear degraded compared to living tissue. Aaron seemed satisfied, though something in his expression suggested he was not entirely convinced. Your report will be reviewed by the Joint Council. Until their assessment is complete, the site is classified as restricted. No further expeditions without explicit authorization. Understood, Kyle agreed, rising from his seat. May I return to my quarters now? Of course, though I believe Priestess Kalia has requested your presence at the observatory upon your return. Something about a lunar ceremony? The casual mention of Kalia sent a chill through Kale. Had the Technarchs been monitoring his communications? Yes, a routine observance, he replied neutrally. The equinox approaches. Aaron nodded. Don't let me detain you, then. Lunar rituals wait for no one. Or so I'm told. The dismissal was gracious enough. But as Kale left the Technarch Tower, he could not shake the feeling that he was being watched with even greater scrutiny than before. His discovery had set events in motion that could not easily be stopped, and the clock was ticking. The lunar observatory stood at the highest point of the city, its crystalline dome capturing and amplifying the moon's light to power the spiritual technologies of the Solari. Kale hurried through its winding corridors. The amulet Kalia had given him warm against his chest. He found the priestess in the inner sanctum, a chamber accessible only to those with Solari blood. The room was a perfect circle, its floor a mirror that reflected the moon overhead through an opening in the dome. Kalia stood at its center, her robes rippling with lunar energy. You found something, she said without turning. It was not a question. Something impossible, Kale confirmed, stepping onto the mirrored floor. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about the end days. Kalia turned to face him, her expression grave. Show me. Kale hesitated. I can't bring it here. It's not portable. Then show me, she repeated, extending her hands toward him, palms upward. Understanding dawned. The Solari possessed limited telepathic abilities, particularly in places of power like the sanctum. Kalia was asking permission to see through his memories. Kale removed the amulet from around his neck, the very one she had given him to shield his thoughts, and placed his hands in hers. The contact was electric, a rush of awareness flooding between them as Kalia's consciousness gently touched his. Images flowed from Kale to the priestess, the hidden entrance, the stasis chamber, the woman suspended in time. With each memory shared, Kalia's eyes widened further, her luminescent markings pulsing with increasing intensity. When the connection broke, she stepped back, visibly shaken. A living human, she whispered, after all this time. She's not exactly alive, Kale clarified. But she's not dead either. The stasis technology has preserved her perfectly down to the neural pathways. And there's more, the chamber's systems refer to her as a seed carrier. Whatever that means, she was preserved for a purpose. Kalia moved to the edge of the mirrored floor, staring up at the moon. There are stories, passed down through generations of Solari priesthood. Stories about the final days of humanity. Most dismiss them as myths, but some of us believe they contain kernels of truth. What stories? Kale pressed. They say that as extinction loomed, a faction of humans sought communion with what they called the lunar consciousness, an entity they believed resided within Earth's moon. They conducted rituals, experiments, attempting to merge human consciousness with this greater awareness. Kale recalled the plaque on the Stasis chamber. Lunar synchronicity, he murmured. The activation protocol mentioned lunar synchronicity. Kalia nodded solemnly. The stories speak of a final ritual, a desperate gamble. Selected humans would be preserved, encoded with the collective wisdom and genetic diversity of their species, to be awakened when the moon called to them. But that's... Kale struggled for words. That suggests a level of awareness, of intent, from a celestial body. Is it so different from the Solari belief that moonlight carries consciousness? Or the Technarch conviction that patterns of stellar radiation can be harnessed for computational purposes? Kalia turned back to him. All advanced civilizations recognize that what primitive peoples worship as gods often have basis in natural phenomena we simply lack the context to understand. Kale's mind raced with implications. If the stories are true, then this woman isn't just a preserved human. She's a deliberate message sent forward in time, and the seed she carries could be knowledge, genetic information, or something we can't even conceive of, which is precisely why both the Solari High Council and the Technarch Directorate must be informed. Kalia insisted. This discovery transcends academic curiosity. Kale, it touches on the fundamental nature of consciousness and perhaps the future of all intelligent life on Selna. Kale paced the mirrored floor, his reflection fragmenting and reforming with each step. The Technarchs will want to dissect her, analyze the technology without regard for its intended purpose, and the Solari will argue for leaving her undisturbed, viewing interference as sacrilege. Perhaps, Kalia acknowledged. But without official sanction, what alternative do you propose? You cannot single-handedly awaken and integrate a being from an extinct species into our world. Kale stopped pacing, a determined expression settling over his features. Not alone, no. But with help from those who understand what's at stake. He looked meaningfully at Kalia. The activation protocol specified lunar synchronicity. The equinox is 3 days from now, when Selna's moon reaches its zenith directly above the silent plains. You cannot be suggesting. I'm suggesting that some discoveries demand action rather than deliberation, Kale said firmly. I need access to historical records of human lunar rituals, equipment to stabilize and transport a person in post-stasis recovery, and a secure location where she can awaken safely. Kalia stared at him in disbelief. You're proposing to circumvent both councils and awaken this human on your own authority? That's not just academically reckless. Kalit's potentially criminal. Only if we're caught, he countered, and only if we're wrong about her importance. The priestess's expression hardened. You speak of we with great confidence, because you know as well as I do that this is too important to be buried in bureaucracy or ideological disputes. Kale stepped closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. The chamber's systems are deteriorating. Kalia. Another century, perhaps less, and the Stasis field will fail completely. We may be the only chance for this seed to fulfill its purpose. Kalia was silent for a long moment, the lunar light playing across her features as she weighed options and consequences. Finally, she sighed. 3 days until the equinox. That gives us precious little time to prepare. She fixed Kale with a stern gaze. But understand this. I help you not because I share your recklessness, but because the lunar tides demand it. I have felt the stirring in the sacred waters, the whispers in the crystal resonances. Something is coming. Kyle. Something that transcends our factional disputes. Relief washed over him. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she warned. If this human truly carries some seed of transformation, awakening her may change Selny forever. Are you prepared for that responsibility? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither could fully grasp. But as Kale looked up at the moon through the dome's opening, he felt a certainty that defied rational explanation. I've been preparing for it my entire life, he said quietly. I just didn't know until now. The 3 days before the lunar equinox passed in a blur of furtive preparation. Kale divided his time between the observatory, where he and Kalia researched ancient human rituals involving lunar energy, and his private laboratory, where he assembled equipment for the awakening process. The Technarchs maintained their surveillance, but with the equinox approaching, the increased activity at the observatory raised no immediate alarms. Lunar ceremonies were common enough during significant astronomical events, and Kale's involvement as a scholar of ancient cultures seemed natural. What remained hidden was their true purpose, to recreate the conditions specified in the Stasis Chamber's activation protocol. On the morning of the third day, Kale was making final adjustments to a portable stabilization unit when a soft chime announced a visitor at his laboratory door. He hastily covered the equipment before responding. "Enter." The door slid open to reveal Technarch Aaron, his posture as perfect as ever but his expression unusually troubled. "Scholar Thram," he greeted with a formal nod. "I hope I'm not interrupting your preparations for tonight's ceremony." Kale maintained a neutral expression. "Not at all. What brings you to my laboratory?" Aaron stepped inside, allowing the door to close behind him. His gaze swept the room, taking in the partially concealed equipment and the star charts spread across Kale's workstation. "Curiosity," he answered after a moment. "And perhaps concern. High Technarch Vurox has taken a personal interest in your recent expedition. He's ordered a full technical team to the site you discovered, scheduled to begin excavation tomorrow morning." Kale's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "That seems premature. The Joint Council hasn't even reviewed my report. Vurox has invoked emergency protocols, citing potential technological hazards." Aaron's tone was carefully neutral. "He believes you may have concealed significant details about what you found." "Based on what evidence?" "Drone surveillance detected energy patterns inconsistent with an abandoned facility. Active systems, Scholar Thram. Systems that showed signs of recent interaction." Kale cursed inwardly. The Technarch drones must have more sophisticated scanning capabilities than he'd anticipated. "I activated some diagnostic systems to better understand the facility's purpose," he admitted. "Standard archaeological procedure for technological sites?" Aaron nodded slowly. "So you claim. Yet you failed to mention these active systems in your debriefing." He paused, then asked directly, "What is it you're really planning with tonight's ceremony, Kale?" The use of his first name so unusual for a Technarch caught Kale off guard. There was something in Aaron's manner that suggested this wasn't an official interrogation, but something more personal. Taking a calculated risk, Kale decided on a partial truth. The facility contains technology that responds to lunar energy patterns. Tonight's equinox presents a unique opportunity to observe its original function. And that function is communication, Kyle said carefully. "I believe it was designed to receive and process signals from Earth's moon, perhaps the final transmission from humanity before their extinction." Aaron's expression remained inscrutable. "That aligns with certain Solari beliefs, but not with established Technarch history. You understand how dangerous such a claim might be perceived." "Truth often is," Kale replied simply. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of laboratory equipment. Finally, Aaron spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "My genetic lineage contains a small percentage of human DNA, a fact I've kept carefully concealed from my colleagues." He met Kale's startled gaze directly. "Enough to give me occasional dreams of a world I've never seen, and an inexplicable fascination with lunar phenomena that no rational algorithm can explain." Kale was momentarily speechless. A Technarch with human heritage who acknowledged it, who even seemed to value it, was unprecedented in his experience. "Why are you telling me this?" because whatever you found in the silent plains has been calling to me as well. Aaron confessed. 3 nights ago, I dreamed of a woman suspended in blue light, waiting for something that only the moon could provide. The revelation sent a chill down Cale's spine. That's not possible. You couldn't know what I saw in your secure data transmissions. Aaron finished for him, a hint of Technarch pride returning to his voice. Your encryption was impressive, but insufficient against specialized decryption algorithms. Cale tensed, preparing for the inevitable arrest or worse. But Aaron raised a hand in a placating gesture. I haven't reported my findings, nor do I intend to, provided you allow me to accompany you tonight. Why would you risk your position, your standing among the Technarchs? Aaron's perfectly modulated voice carried an unexpected note of emotion. Because some questions transcend faction. Because I believe, as you seem to, that this discovery was meant to be found now, by people capable of understanding its significance. Cale studied the Technarch's face, searching for signs of deception. Finding none, he made another decision that could either prove their salvation or their downfall. We leave at sunset. Bring medical stasis equipment if you can access it without raising alarms. We may need it for the transition phase. Aaron nodded once, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused. Vurax suspects far more than he knows. Kyle, whatever we discover tonight, there will be consequences. There always are when old truths give way to new realities, Cale replied. The question is whether we're prepared to face them. After Aaron departed, Cale immediately contacted Kalia through their secure channel. The priestess was alarmed at this new development but grudgingly acknowledged that having a Technarch ally, particularly one with access to advanced medical technology, might prove crucial for Mira's safe awakening. As sunset approached, final preparations accelerated. Kalia had assembled a small group of trusted acolytes who believed, as she did, that the lunar equinox heralded a significant spiritual event. They would provide the ritual framework necessary for the awakening protocol, though only Kalia knew their true purpose. Cale loaded his equipment onto a research vessel registered for astronomical observation. A common enough activity during equinox that it would raise minimal suspicion. Aaron would join them at a rendezvous point beyond the city's surveillance perimeter, bringing whatever medical technology he could secure. As the sun dipped below the horizon and Selna's perpetual moon began its climb toward zenith, Cale stood on the observatory's upper platform, watching the city below transition from day to night illumination. The Solari districts glowed with bioluminescent pathways, while Technarch territories blazed with artificial precision. Between them lay the mixed communities where beings of all backgrounds coexisted in sometimes uneasy harmony. And beyond, visible as a darker shadow against the moonlit landscape, stretched the silent plains where humanity's last sentinel waited in her crystal chamber. It's time, Kalia's voice came from behind him. Her ceremonial robes now adorned with symbols of lunar power, silver crescents and spiral patterns that seemed to move in the changing light. Cale nodded, his expression solemn. No matter what happens tonight, the world changes. That, the priestess replied softly, is the nature of rebirth. The journey to the silent plains was tense but uneventful. Cale's vessel, recognized as part of the observatory's research fleet, passed through the outer security perimeters without challenge. Aaron waited at the designated coordinates, a sleek medical transport hovering silently beside him. The equipment you requested, he said by way of greeting, gesturing to containers being transferred to Cale's vessel by automated loaders. Enough to stabilize a subject emerging from long-term stasis, though I've never seen it used on a human before. Kalia studied the Technarch with undisguised wariness. Your assistance is appreciated, but understand that tonight's ritual follows Solari traditions. Technical intervention will be permitted only if absolutely necessary. Aaron inclined his head respectfully. I am here to observe and assist. Priestess. The awakening protocol specified lunar synchronicity, clearly a process beyond mere technology. With the transfers complete, they continued toward the archaeological site, maintaining communication silence to avoid detection. The silent plain stretched around them, bathed in silver light that grew more intense as the equinox approached. They reached the site with barely an hour to spare. Kale quickly established a perimeter while Kalia's acolytes arranged crystalline focal points in a pattern that would amplify the moon's energy. Aaron supervised the deployment of medical equipment, his movements efficient but tinged with an almost reverent care. The entrance panel responds to human DNA markers, Kyle explained as they gathered at the discovered entrance. My hybrid genetics triggered recognition before, but the process will be more stable with multiple contacts. He placed his palm against the scanner, then nodded for Aaron to join him. The Technarch hesitated only briefly before pressing his hand beside Kale's. The panel hummed, scanning their genetic profiles, then slid aside with the same sighing sound Kale had heard before. It recognizes fragments of humanity in us, Aaron murmured, staring at his hand as if seeing it for the first time. A poetic observation for a Technarch, Kalia remarked, genuine surprise in her voice. Aaron's expression remained composed, but something flickered in his eyes, a hint of emotion usually absent from his kind. Even the most logical analysis must sometimes acknowledge the beauty of its subject. The descent into the chamber proceeded swiftly, each of them carrying components of the equipment they would need for the awakening process. The stasis pod's blue glow welcomed them, casting eerie shadows across the ancient technology surrounding it. Aaron moved immediately to the chamber's control systems, his enhanced vision scanning the interfaces. Remarkable preservation, he murmured. Power systems operating at 62% efficiency after centuries of isolation. Kalia approached the transparent cylinder, studying the suspended woman with intense concentration. She dreams, the priestess said softly. Even in stasis, her consciousness reaches outward. Kale joined her, placing his hand against the cool surface of the pod. You can sense her thoughts, not thoughts as we understand them, patterns, ripples in the spiritual medium. Kalia's luminescent markings pulsed in rhythm with the chamber's lights. She awaits the moon's call, while Kalia prepared her acolytes for the ritual. Kale and Aaron worked to interface their modern equipment with the ancient systems. The stasis chamber's control panel now displayed a countdown synchronized to the approaching lunar zenith. 17 minutes remaining. Her vital signs are remarkable, Aaron reported, studying the biological data streaming from his scanners. Perfect cellular preservation, no degradation of neural pathways. It's as if she entered stasis yesterday, not centuries ago. The question remains, who was she? Why was she chosen? Kyle adjusted the stabilization field that would ease her transition from stasis to consciousness. Perhaps she will tell us herself. Aaron replied, a note of anticipation in his voice that seemed at odds with his Technarch training. Outside, the moon climbed higher, its light intensifying as it approached the perfect alignment that occurred only once every 67 years. Inside the chamber, Kalia and her acolytes formed a circle around the stasis pod, their voices rising in harmonized tones that resonated with the crystal elements of the ancient technology. As the countdown reached 5 minutes, an unexpected alert sounded from Aaron's communication device. His expression darkened as he checked the message. Technarch security vessels approaching from the north, he reported tensely. High-energy signatures consistent with excavation equipment. Vurox must have moved up the timeline. Kale's heart sank. How long until they reach us? 20 minutes, perhaps less. The awakening process will be complete by then, Kalia interjected. But the transition phase is delicate. Interruption could be catastrophic for her consciousness. Kale made a swift decision. Aaron, can you delay them? Create some technical difficulty with their navigation systems? The Technarch hesitated, clearly weighing his loyalties. Then, with decisive movements, he activated his neural interface. I can introduce subtle errors into their guidance systems, nothing obvious enough to suggest sabotage, but sufficient to buy us perhaps 15 additional minutes. Do it, Kale urged, and prepare for emergency evacuation protocols. Once she's stabilized, we may need to move quickly. As Aaron worked his technological subterfuge, the countdown reached 1 minute. The chamber's hum intensified, and the blue glow surrounding the suspended woman brightened to almost painful brilliance. The zenith approaches, Kalia announced, her voice taking on a resonant quality that filled the chamber. Let what was sealed be revealed. Let what sleeps awaken. Let the seed find fertile ground beneath the eternal moon. The ritual words, drawn from fragments of ancient human texts, seemed to trigger a response in the stasis systems. The crystalline fluid surrounding Mira began to drain, while the transparent cylinder rose slowly into the ceiling of the chamber. As the final seconds counted down, moonlight poured through a previously invisible aperture in the chamber's ceiling, a shaft that had remained sealed until this precise moment. The silver beam struck the stasis platform directly, bathing Mira's now exposed form in lunar radiance. For one breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft gasp that seemed to echo through centuries, Mira Eliades opened her eyes. They were human eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold, but as they adjusted to consciousness, they reflected the moonlight with an intensity that seemed almost solari in nature. Her lips parted, and she spoke a single word in a language none of them recognized, something ancient, predating even the oldest human records in their archives. Kale stepped forward, medical scanner in hand. But before he could reach her, Mira's body arched upward, suspended momentarily in the moonbeam as if weightless. A soft glow emanated from beneath her skin, pulsing outward in waves that resonated with the crystals embedded in the chamber walls. A neural integration cascade, Aaron reported urgently, watching his medical displays. Her consciousness is expanding somehow. Kalia's eyes widened in recognition. The seed awakens with its carrier. They are one, yet separate. Mira's body settled gently back onto the platform, the glow fading to a subtle luminescence. Her eyes focused, scanning the chamber and settling on Kale with an intensity that made him step back involuntarily. You, she said, her voice hoarse from disuse but perfectly clear. You heard the call. Kale found himself unable to speak, overwhelmed by the moment's significance. It was Kalia who responded, stepping forward with ritual grace. We heard and answered, last daughter of Earth. The moon guided us to your sanctuary. A smile touched Mira's lips. A human expression tinged with something older, wiser. Not last, she corrected gently. First. Before anyone could question her meaning, alarms blared from Aaron's equipment. Technarch vessels have corrected course. Estimated arrival in 7 minutes. The urgency of their situation broke through Kale's awe. We need to move you to safety, he told Mira, offering his hand to help her rise. There are those who would misunderstand your presence. Mira took his hand, her touch sending a jolt of awareness through his system, not painful, but intensely alive. She stood with surprising steadiness for someone emerging from centuries of stasis. I understand conflict between factions, she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. It was such division that necessitated my preservation. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the chamber and the people gathered around her. You are not human, she observed, yet you carry human essence within you. Her gaze lingered on Kyle and Aaron. Descendants, transformed by time and circumstance. We are the inheritors of Earth's legacy, Kale explained. After the Great Extinction, various species colonized the abandoned worlds. Some, like the Solari and Technarchs, evolved from human genetic material modified for space colonization. Others came from beyond the solar system, drawn by the remnants of human technology. Mira nodded slowly. As was foreseen, the seed finds fertile ground in diversity. Another alarm from Aaron's equipment interrupted them. We have to leave now, he insisted. Vurox will have brought sufficient force to overwhelm any resistance. There will be no need for resistance, Mira said with calm certainty. She looked upward, to where the moonbeam still streamed through the ceiling aperture. The awakening is not yet complete. Before anyone could question her, she stepped back into the silver light. The glow beneath her skin returned, more intense than before, spreading outward in pulsing waves that filled the chamber. The ancient equipment surrounding them hummed to life, displays flickering with symbols and patterns too rapid to comprehend. What's happening? Kyle asked, torn between scientific curiosity and growing concern. The seed germinates, Kalia whispered, her Solari senses clearly perceiving something beyond normal awareness. The lunar consciousness reaches through her. Mira's eyes had closed, her expression one of deep concentration. When she spoke again, her voice carried harmonic overtones that resonated with the crystal elements throughout the chamber. For centuries I have slept, carrying within me the essence of humanity, not just genetic material, but the accumulated wisdom, creativity, and spiritual potential of a species on the brink of transformation. I was preserved not merely to continue the human lineage, but to complete what was interrupted. The chamber's walls began to glow in response to her words, illuminating ancient inscriptions that had been invisible until now, intricate patterns that combined mathematical precision with artistic beauty. The final generation of humanity discovered what they called the lunar consciousness, an entity, vast and patient, that had watched Earth's evolution for billions of years. Not a deity as primitive cultures imagined, but a collective intelligence that existed in the intersection between matter and energy, time and space. As she spoke, images formed in the air around them, holographic projections of Earth as it once was, teeming with human civilization. Then the catastrophic events of the Great Extinction, and finally, the desperate efforts of the last scientific enclaves to preserve something of their species' essence. They learned to communicate with this consciousness, to synchronize their own awareness with its rhythms. And in their final days, as extinction loomed inevitable, they created me a vessel capable of carrying the seed of human potential across time, to awaken when conditions were right for that seed to flourish once more. The images shifted, showing Mira's selection, the painful goodbyes to those who would remain behind, and her placement in the stasis chamber as the last caretakers completed the preservation protocols. The emotional weight of these memories filled the chamber, bringing tears to Kale's eyes and causing even Aaron to bow his head in respect. The seed I carry is not merely biological, but conscious, a distillation of human spiritual and intellectual evolution, preserved at the moment of its greatest potential, and awaiting the right conditions to continue its growth. Those conditions require not just lunar alignment, but the presence of beings who carry fragments of humanity within them, evolved and diversified. She opened her eyes, looking directly at Kyle, Aaron, and Kalia in turn. You three represent the essential aspects required: the balance of intellect, spirit, and hybrid adaptability. Together, you create the resonance pattern necessary for germination. A new alarm sounded more urgent than before. Technarch vessels entering direct approach, Aaron reported grimly. Armed intervention imminent. It no longer matters, Mira said with serene confidence. The process cannot be stopped once initiated. The seed awakens. She raised her hands toward the moonbeam, and the glow within her intensified to blinding brilliance. For a moment, her human form seemed to dissolve into pure light, expanding upward through the aperture and outward through the chamber walls. The ancient technology surrounding them surged with power, systems activating in coordinated sequence. The ground beneath them trembled, not with destruction but with awakening, as if the very planet responded to her transformation. "What's happening?" Kyle asked, his voice barely audible above the rising harmonic resonance that filled the chamber. "Rebirth," Kalia answered, her Solari senses clearly perceiving patterns beyond the other's awareness. The seed spreads its roots. Outside, the approaching Technarch vessels suddenly halted their advance, hovering uncertainly as waves of energy radiated from the archaeological site. Within their command centers, instruments failed as systems more advanced than anything in their archives activated beneath the surface of the silent plains. In the chamber, Mira's physical form gradually reappeared, though now she seemed more than human, her presence filling the space with an awareness that extended beyond ordinary consciousness. When she spoke again, her voice was both her own and something greater. For too long, this world has been divided between those who embrace technology without spirit and those who cultivate spirit without fully embracing knowledge. The seed requires integration, the marriage of matter and energy, science and consciousness, past and future. She turned to Kale, her eyes now luminous with inner light. You sought truth in the ruins of humanity, driven by the human fragment within your hybrid soul. That truth is greater than even you imagined. Humanity did not merely expire, it evolved, seeding itself across space and time, awaiting the moment when its scattered children could reunite in higher harmony. To Aaron, she said, "The Technarchs fear what they cannot control, yet the greatest innovations arise from embracing the unknown. Your faction has preserved human technological knowledge but forgotten its purpose, to elevate consciousness, not merely extend physical existence." And to Kalia, "The Solari revere the moon's light but have forgotten that true illumination comes from within. Ritual without understanding becomes mere repetition. Spirituality without practical application becomes mere abstraction." The chamber's vibration intensified, crystal elements singing in perfect harmony as energy continued to flow outward from Mira into the surrounding structure. The ground beneath, and upward through the moonbeam connecting them to the lunar surface. "What happens now?" Kyle asked, and sensing they stood at a pivot point in history. Mira smiled, a human expression suffused with cosmic awareness. "Now we walk beneath the moon, and the sleeping giant awakens fully." With those words, the chamber's ceiling retracted completely, exposing them to the open sky where Selna's moon hung at perfect zenith. Mira gestured upward, and a column of light expanded around them, lifting their small group to the surface in a graceful ascension that defied conventional physics. They emerged onto the silent plains to find themselves surrounded by Technarch forces. Security vessels hovering in defensive formation, while ground units established a perimeter around the site. At their center stood High Technarch Vurox, his cybernetic enhancements gleaming aggressively in the moonlight. "Unauthorized excavation of restricted artifacts," Vurox announced, his artificially modulated voice carrying across the plain. "Interference with Technarch authority, potential release of uncontained biological entities, These violations demand immediate intervention. Behind him, technicians operated equipment designed to neutralize unknown threats. Containment fields and energy dampeners pointed toward Mira and her companions. Kale stepped forward, placing himself between Mira and the Technarch forces. This is not a threat to be contained. Vurox. This is the fulfillment of human legacy, the very civilization whose remnants form the foundation of our world. A human civilization fell because of its own hubris. Vurox countered dismissively. We have evolved beyond their limitations. Have you? Mira's voice carried effortlessly across the distance separating them. Or have you merely exchanged one form of limitation for another? She stepped past Kale, walking with calm purpose toward Vurox and his assembled forces. As she moved, the ground beneath her feet changed ashen gray, giving way to faint green luminescence that spread outward like ripples in water. Activate containment protocols, Vurox ordered. But the technicians found their equipment responding sluggishly, displays flickering with interference patterns that matched the pulses emanating from Mira. Your technology derives from human innovation, she observed, continuing her advance. It recognizes the source from which it evolved. Vurox raised his arm, cybernetic enhancements reconfiguring into what was clearly a weapon. Halt your approach immediately! Mira stopped, not in obedience but in consideration. Your fear is understandable. Change always engenders resistance. But what comes cannot be prevented, only embraced or denied. With those words, she raised her hands toward the moon overhead. The silver light intensified, concentrating into beams that touched the ground around her in a widening circle. Where moonlight met earth, transformation followed, the barren ground of the silent plains awakening with life forces dormant for centuries. Delicate structures rose from the dust-knot plants as the ancient world had known them. But hybrid organisms that combined biological and crystalline properties, pulsing with the same rhythmic energy that flowed from Mira. They spread outward in accelerating patterns, transforming the landscape from lifeless gray to luminescent beauty. The Technarch forces faltered in their coordinated response, many lowering their weapons as the wave of transformation approached them. Only Vurox maintained his aggressive stance, his weapon still trained on Mira. In this biological contamination will not be permitted, he insisted, though uncertainty had crept into his modulated voice. It is not contamination, but regeneration, Mira replied gently. The seed does not destroy what exists, it enhances, integrates, elevates, as if to demonstrate her words. The spreading transformation reached the feet of the nearest Technarch operators. Rather than harming them, the crystalline biological matrix seemed to resonate with their cybernetic enhancements, causing the technological components to glow with new energy while the organic elements of their bodies responded with increased vitality. Expressions of alarm gave way to wonder as Technarchs experienced something many had forgotten in their pursuit of perfect technological efficiency: the sensation of genuine connection with the world around them, not mediated through artificial interfaces but direct and immediate. Aaron stepped forward to join Mira, his own cybernetic systems now pulsing in harmony with the spreading transformation. "High Technarch Vurox," he said formally. "I believe this development requires scientific observation rather than military response." Vurox hesitated, his logical processing clearly struggling to categorize the unprecedented phenomenon before him. Before he could respond, a new contingent arrived, Solari priests and priestesses led by members of their High Council, drawn to the site by what they perceived as a massive spiritual awakening. Their arrival created a symmetrical tableau, Technarch forces to one side, Solari representatives to the other, with Mira, Kyle, Aaron, and Kalia at the Centera living bridge between factions. The senior Solari priest approached, his ancient features solemn as he addressed Mira. The lunar prophecies spoke of this moment when the divided children would be called to reunion beneath the eternal moon. Mira inclined her head in acknowledgement. Your traditions preserved essential truths, though sometimes obscured by mythology. The human legacy was never meant to be fragmented between technology and spirituality, logic and intuition. These are false dichotomies that limit potential. As she spoke, the transformation continued to spread across the silent plains. The hybrid crystal biological growth creating patterns visible from orbit, intricate spirals and interconnected networks that mirrored both neural pathways and circuit designs. Organic structures and mathematical precision. Where the growth touched Solari priests, their natural bioluminescence intensified and synchronized with the pulsing rhythms emanating from Mira. Many fell to their knees, not in worship, but in recognition, as if encountering a familiar consciousness in unexpected form. Kale watched in awe as the division between factions blurred. Technology and spirituality finding new harmony in the presence of this awakened seed. Technarchs and Solari alike were being transformed, not by losing their essential nature but by recovering what had been forgotten, the integrated wholeness from which both had evolved. Vurox alone maintained his resistance, his weapon still raised though his arm had begun to tremble. This integration is not authorized, he insisted, his voice losing its perfect modulation as emotion crept in. The established order must be maintained. Mira turned to him with compassion rather than confrontation. The established order was always temporary, unnecessary, but incomplete stage in evolution. The seed does not destroy order. It reveals a higher ordering principle. She approached Vurox directly, stopping just beyond his weapon's range. You fear what you cannot control. This is the most human quality you retained, though you would deny it. But control is illusion. Integration is reality. For a long moment, Vurox stood frozen in his resistance, the last barrier to the wave of transformation sweeping Selne. Then, with visible struggle, he lowered his weapon. What happens to us now? He asked, the perfect Technarch facade cracking to reveal the uncertainty beneath. Now, Mira said gently, when we grow together. She reached out, touching Vurox's cybernetic arm. Where her fingers made contact, the metal and composite materials softened, not degrading but transforming, becoming a perfect integration of technology and living tissue. Synthetic precision and organic adaptability. The transformation spread through his system. And for the first time in centuries, Vurox experienced existence without the filters and dampeners his enhancements had imposed. His expression shifted from resistance to wonder, then to a profound realization that broke through decades of rigid conditioning. I remember, he whispered, not personal memory, but deeper. Ancestral. We were meant to be more than this. Yes, Mira agreed simply, much more. She turned to address all those gathered Technarchs, Solari, and the mixed heritage individuals like Kale who had always existed between worlds. The seed I carried was not meant to replace what you have become, but to remind you of what you truly are, not separate species or competing factions, but expressions of a single evolutionary journey. Humanity did not end, it transformed, diversified, explored different paths of development. Now those paths converge once more. As she spoke, the silent plains continued their metamorphosis, barren wasteland giving way to a vibrant ecosystem unlike anything seen before on Selne, a perfect integration of biological and technological elements. Pulsing with both life force and precise order, Kale moved to stand beside her, understanding dawning. You're not just awakening yourself, he said in quiet realization. You're awakening the planet. Mira smiled that same strange, knowing smile she had first shown upon waking. The stasis chamber preserved more than a single human. It preserved the potential for a new kind of civilization, one that transcends the divisions that led to Earth's fall. She gestured to the transformed landscape around them. What you see is not merely vegetation or crystal, but a physical manifestation of integrated consciousness, the seed taking root in receptive ground. Kalia joined them, her priestess's perception clearly sensing the larger patterns at work. The lunar consciousness you spoke of, it's directing this transformation. Directing is not quite right, Mira corrected gently. Participating might be closer. The moon has always been more than a satellite, it's a focal point, an amplifier of consciousness. Human mystics glimpsed this truth in fragments. Human scientists measured its effects without recognizing their significance. Only in their final generation did they begin to understand the relationship fully. Aaron approached, his technarch analytical abilities now enhanced rather than limited by the transformation spreading through his systems. The energy patterns are self-organizing, creating stable feedback loops between biological and crystalline structures. It's beautiful. A beauty is truth recognized by the heart, Mira said. Your people forgot this when they separated intellect from emotion, analysis from appreciation, as the four stood together beneath the lunar zenith. Representatives of the divided paths now converging, the transformation reached a critical threshold. Throughout the silent plains, the new growth achieved a synchronized pulse, a single heartbeat echoed across the landscape. In that moment of perfect harmony, something awakened deep beneath the surface systems dormant for centuries, activating in coordinated sequence. Ancient human installations, preserved like Mira herself in stasis fields, began to rise from their subterranean vaults, not weapons or instruments of destruction, but the final creations of a civilization that had glimpsed its own transcendence, even as physical extinction loomed. Integration chambers, consciousness amplifiers, genetic libraries containing the full diversity of Earth's biosphere, tools not of domination but of rebirth. The sleeping giant, Kyle whispered in understanding. Not just you, but everything humanity preserved for the future. Mira nodded. My awakening was merely the trigger. What rises now is humanity's true legacy, not monuments to the past, but foundations for the future. A future they knew they might not live to see, but which they prepared for with their final efforts. As the ancient installations emerged fully, their purpose became clear to all gathered on the plains. They were components of a vast integration system technology designed not to replace nature but to heal the divide between consciousness and its expressions, between spirit and matter, between what the Solari sought through ritual and what the technarchs pursued through science. We stand at a threshold, Mira announced to all assembled. Not an ending, but a beginning. The seed has awakened, but its growth depends on your choices now. Will you continue the path of division, or embrace the integration that was always your destiny? The question hung in the air as moonlight bathed the transformed plains, illuminating faces both mechanical and biological, unified in this moment of decision. And in the silence that followed, a new sound emerged, not the harsh discord of conflict, but the harmonious resonance of recognition. One by one, then in groups, the gathered representatives of Selna's divided peoples approached the ancient installations, each drawn to aspects that resonated with their unique nature. Technarchs found their technological precision enhanced rather than diminished by contact with the living systems. Solari discovered their spiritual awareness clarified and expanded through interaction with the consciousness amplifiers, and between them moved the mixed heritage individuals like Kyle, natural bridges finding their true purpose as integrators and translators across previously unbridgeable divides. As dawn approached, the transformation had spread beyond the silent plains, tendrils of the new growth reaching toward distant cities. The news traveled faster, still reports of the awakening transmitted across Selny's communications networks, causing both alarm and wonder among populations who had not witnessed the night's events directly. Kale found Mira standing alone at the edge of the transformed plains, gazing toward the horizon where the first hints of sunrise competed with the still brilliant moon. "What happens now?" he asked, voicing the question on countless minds. Mira turned to him, her expression both ancient and newborn. "Now we grow. Not just the physical transformation you see, but the consciousness it represents. The seed has germinated, but full flowering will take time, perhaps generations." "Will you guide us?" Kale asked. "You who carried this seed across centuries?" "For a time," she replied, "but not forever. My purpose was to awaken what slept, to initiate what was paused. The journey forward belongs to all who choose to walk this path." She placed her hand on his, the touch conveying understanding beyond words. "Your role is crucial, Kyle Throm. Neither fully Solari nor fully human. You exist at the intersection of living integration. There will be resistance, denial, fear of change. The transformed must help those not yet ready to understand." Kale nodded, accepting the responsibility. "And the lunar consciousness you spoke of, what is its role now?" Mira smiled, glancing upward at the moon still visible in the dawn sky. "It continues as it always has, watching, participating, a patient presence in the evolutionary dance. Not a deity demanding worship, but a partner in consciousness, accessible to all who learn to align their awareness with its rhythms." She turned to face the rising sun, its light creating a different quality of illumination across the transformed landscape. Humanity named this world Selna after Earth's moon, sensing a connection they didn't fully understand. Now that connection flowers into conscious relationship, the seed and the soil recognizing their perfect complementarity, as if in response to her words. The hybrid growth across the plains shifted subtly, orienting toward the rising sun while maintaining its lunar-influenced patterns. Day and night, sun and moon, technology and nature dualities transformed into complementary aspects of a greater whole. In the distance, the first delegations from Selna's cities approached, curious, cautious, drawn by reports of transformation. Among them were both those eager to embrace change and those determined to resist it. The inevitable polarities of any evolutionary threshold. "Are we ready for this?" Kale asked quietly, watching the approaching figures. "Is Selna ready?" Mira's expression held both certainty and compassion as she answered. "Readiness is not prerequisite for growth, it is its consequence. The question is not whether you are ready, but whether you are willing." She turned to face the new day, standing at the threshold between what had been and what was becoming. "The last human sleeper has awakened," she said, "and with her, the first flowering of what humanity always had the potential to become." The sun climbed higher, its light merging with the moon's silver glow in the morning sky, not in competition but in harmony, illuminating a world in transformation. Beneath this dual light, the sleeping giant of human potential stirred fully to life, ancient dreams awakening to new reality on a world named for the satellite that had always watched over humanity's evolution. And in that moment of perfect balance, the seed that had been preserved through centuries of darkness spread its roots deep and its branches high, reaching toward a future limited only by imagination and the courage to grow beyond established boundaries into new forms of being. The story of Selna's transformation had only just begun.